Model Making Guru is sponsored by emodels.co.uk. Make something awesome. Okay, so part of the charm of the Falcon, of course, is its beaten and battered look. And what we're going to do next is make the cushions that we've painted on these rear seats, the parasite brown little bits, we're going to make them look a bit less factory fresh. Now, there are a billion two ways that you can do this, and do keep in mind I'm putting figures in these seats, so most of these cushions are going to be covered up, but it's entirely up to you. I'm going to show you a simple shade and dry brush method. If you're having nobody in the cockpit at all, you can go to town on these and make them look super cool, but you don't have to. If you are putting the figures in there and it is going to be dark in the cockpit, you can skip this step if you want. I'm just doing it because I want to show you how I'm going to do it and how I make leather things look a bit more worn. Now, I'm going in with some Citadel Nuln Oil, which is a dark, transparent, bluey black wash. Now, as of the time of recording, eModels are due to shortly start stocking the entire Citadel paint range. When you're watching this, of course, they may have them all in stock, so I do recommend you pick yourself up some of the Citadel shades. However, if they're not in stock right now, or if they haven't stocked them yet, don't panic, you can make your own. Just get you a bottle of Vallejo Game ink, the black ink, and add a couple of drops of that to some Vallejo Glaze Medium, and voila, you have something very similar to Nuln Oil. Now, the reason I'm doing this with the shade, or the reason that you might make your own shade, is because I could do this with a thin paint wash, but it wouldn't look the same. The thin wash would just disappear into the recesses. I want this to tint the whole cushion and to also collect where gravity pulls it down towards the bottom of the back cushion and in the centre of the bottom cushion, if that makes sense. I need it to just make the cushion look more three-dimensional and cushiony and also darker. A normal wash wouldn't really do that. Next up, it's time for some Vallejo Game Colour Khaki. We've made those cushions nice and dark now, they're a much darker brown colour. We need to make them look like worn leather, and this is where dry brushing comes in. So we're going to go around the cushions, we're going to dry brush. Now, if you've seen me do this before, you know what this is, but the first thing you do is get a bit of paint on your brush, then you get most of it back off again on the tissue. Now, because I want to pick up the edges here, what I'm going to do is basically flick this brush now back and forth over the edges of these cushions as carefully as I can. I don't want to get paint all over the rest of the seat. Now, the trick here is to make sure, first of all, there's as little paint as possible on the brush. You'll see me running it on the back of my hand there a couple of times just to get the excess off. But you also want to make sure you're using a good brush for dry brushing. Now, I'm using here, it's an old Citadel base brush, but it's an old one. It's lost its curvy shape, all the bristles are a bit splayed out. It's perfect because as I'm brushing this across the edges, not only is the paint catching on the edges, the occasional bristle will drag a very, very subtle faint line across the flat bit of the leather, and it just makes it look kind of scratchy like worn leather. So I want to get the edges, but because of the fluffy brush dragging the occasional bristle across, that's what you want. You don't want a nice, clean, spanky, perfect condition brush because it's not going to have the randomness that you want. So this is why you always want to keep your brushes, never throw old brushes away when they get a bit worn and useless, when they no longer hold their point or they've got sticky out bristles, they go a bit hedgehoggy. Keep them because that's what they're useful for. Next up, I'm going to tackle the little display screen in the middle of the instrument panel, and for this I've just got some white paint. I'm using Citadel's White Scar, but any white paint will do, and I'm just filling in the centre of this little recessed screen. Now, because it's on my wet palette, it's got a little tiny bit of extra water in it to keep it flowy and to make it nice and paintable, and I'm not really overly brushing it, I'm just kind of placing the paint in the recess. If I do get any of the white paint over the edge around the sort of raised lip, that's fine, I'll just go and clean it up with some more of the silver paint once the white's dried, no biggie. Now, if you're wondering why I'm painting a green display screen white, you'll find out shortly. Once that's done and I've cleaned up the edges with the silver, it's time to go with the green, and for this we're going to use Crystal Periscope Green, a wonderful, wonderful semi-transparent colour by Ammo by Mig. I love this colour. It is the perfect colour for vintage old 1980s, 1970s style computer screens, Pip-Boy screens, things like that, and it's exactly what I want here. It's so perfect because it's not just a clear green colour. It's not like Tamiya clear paints where they're uniformly clear. This depends on how thick it is. If it's very thin, it's really clear, but it has a very slight green tint. If it's very thick, it's just green. And that can be used to your advantage on convex and concave surfaces. It doesn't really work on flat surfaces, but here where it's recessed, it's concave, it will collect in the middle, and the middle will be darker than the outside, which will be a very light green. You'll see it in a second. On a convex surface, like a raised screen, of course, it would flow down to the edges, so it would be darker on the edges and a lighter green in the middle. That's exactly what you want. I will end up doing a second coat just to darken it a bit, because it's a bit of an obvious white line around the edge there, but that's why this colour is brilliant. It's not just clear, it's just weird. Okay, now it's time for the fun times, and these are the bits I like. I love doing decals. Now, some of you might consider decals like a dark, mysterious art. Now, keep in mind, of course, I am tailoring this video towards the beginners amongst you, not the hardcore pros that know what they're doing. So I'm taking you through, first initial steps. Some of you might consider decals, water slide decals, and it's decals, not decals, decals, to be a dark art. You might have either never tried it and thought, oh, it looks really scary, or you may have tried it and not done very well and thought it's your fault. If it comes out badly, it's generally typically down to bad decals, not necessarily a lack of skill, because decals not that hard. So we're going to put all the cockpit decals on. You can see them all here, save for one or two. What we're going to do is I'm just going to show you one. I'm not going to sit here and do all of them. And we'll show you one. Now remember, this is the limited edition kit, and these water slide decals do not come with the standard edition of this kit. They only come with the limited edition of this kit. So if you do want the kit with the water slide decals, that's the one that's in stock at the minute at emodels.co.uk, your one-stop shop for all your model making needs. So make sure you go and snag one. So what you'll need the bit, the decal, some tweezers, one or two pairs is quite handy sometimes, and soft brush, and cotton buddings or Q-tip for our colonial cousins. And a cocktail stick or toothpick for our colonial cousins. Now, if you're experienced, you can move decals around on the model with tweezers. If you're not experienced, I don't recommend that because you might knacker the tweezer. One other thing you'll need is water. Go for some nice warm water. Doesn't matter if it's not warm. Doesn't matter if it's cold or anything, but it's usually good to try and keep it warm because then the decal comes off the backing paper. And what we're trying to do, a decal is basically a printed design on a piece of backing paper, and it's surrounded by a thin carrier film. It's often, you can see it like a clear outline around the edge. Now, good quality ones have a small carrier film around the edge. Crappy decals will have a massive piece of clear film around the edge. You have to trim that down a bit to make sure it fits. But these are Bandai decals and they're pretty darn good, so you should be fine. So what we're going to do, we're going to get this decal off the paper. First thing you want to do is just basically stick the decal in the water. Now, if it's a big long decal like this and it starts to curl like that, just put it the other way up. Because if it curls up completely, of course, some of it's going to be sticking out the water. Just put it in the water, leave it in there for 30 seconds. Now again, if it's warm water, it'll be a little faster. Some older decals and some brands of decals take, up to a minute to actually come away from the paper. So it can take a little longer. This water's gone a bit cold by now because this is take 2 of doing decals. Yeah, it's gone a bit cold. So what you want to do is get the decal in there and just ever so gently, every now and then, just give it a little wiggle with a brush, just to see if it starts moving. And what you're looking for is for the decal to start to slide away from the backing paper with no resistance. I'm not putting any pressure on, I'm just very gently wiggling it. It might need a bit longer. This water has gone a bit cold. So yes, decals are not that complicated. I forgot to mention, by the way, there's 2 decal setting solutions, but I'll explain them in a minute. Yeah, decals are not that complicated. Once you've done a few and you've got the hang of it, you'll be fine. It can be tricky with decals over, like, weird surfaces and things like that. And if they're crappy decals and low quality decals, you might have to do a bit of TLC. Now this is starting to wiggle on the paper, so I'm going to take it out. Oops, if I can pick it up. put the water over there. Do note, by the way, I moved the decal sheets away from where we're going to be working. Always move your decal sheets away from where the water is. That's a mistake you do once. You learn from that mistake, and it's a mistake that takes place once. That, you know, you've got your water in your decals and you knock it and all the water goes over the decals and your decals are ruined. Yeah. So this is now starting to move. You can see that's got a bit of wiggle to it. So what we're going to do is we're quite simply going to put this in place. Now, if you know what you're doing, you can do this with tweezers. If you're a beginner, I'd probably recommend you do it with a brush. So get yourself the brush a little bit damp, get some water on the surface, and then just simply slide the decal off. This is why they're called water slide decals, because you soften them in water, get them off the carrier film, and then slide them into place. Now, some people will tell you that you're supposed to gloss varnish the surface before you apply a decal. You can do, you don't have to. If it's a rough surface and it's, you know, it's not particularly smooth, then you might find a benefit to that. You absolutely don't have to. I haven't gloss varnished this at all, because these are flat decals going on a flat surface. It will mean that the decal moves a bit easier. You know, it'll slide around a bit easier on the surface, but it's not the end of the world if it doesn't. So what I'm going to do now is probably go off camera. I'm going to get this decal lined up. Now, this strip here, as I knock the camera, this white strip at the top is supposed to represent and simulate the sort of strip light that lines up with the back wall. So we shall have to hope that that is in the right place. Yeah. So the decal's on. Looks like it's lined up. So the first thing you want to do, once the decal's on there, just take it off this backing. Once the decal's on, is get yourself a cotton bud, and very gently you want to roll the cotton bud like this. You're not just pushing down and dragging, you want to roll it. You want to press gently and just roll it towards the edge. I'm not dragging because that will move the decal. The decal will probably move anyway. But what I'm trying to do here is squeeze out all the excess water that's underneath. Very gently. Now on a flat surface it's a bit of a doddle. If this had lots of raised detail, this might be a bit more challenging. But I'm rolling the cotton bud there. Just making sure, checking down the side, it's lined up. Looks like it. As far as I can tell, it's all nice and straight. And I'm just squeezing the water out the top and out the bottom, and in a minute I'll do it down the sides as well. You want to try and get the water to squeeze out of any gaps, especially if you haven't gloss varnish. Like I say, you don't have to gloss varnish. It can be helpful, but it's an extra step you don't need to do absolutely. I used to do it all the time religiously, and then I was in a situation where I couldn't gloss varnish and I had to put the decal on, and it was fine. The reason you're supposed to gloss varnish is it helps reduce silvering, which is where air gets trapped under the decal. And that's what this step hopes to remove, is any air and any water under there. So there we go, that is on. Now remember how we didn't actually file it flat completely when we sanded this and filed it down. We didn't make it baby butt smooth. There were still some slight raised details here and there. That's fine, because although you can't really see it now because it's a shiny decal, once it's matted you'll see there's some little sort of relief areas. It just gives the decal a little, I don't know if it'll catch the light, it gives the decal a little touch of three-dimensionality, just a little bit. But if we hadn't got rid of all those raised details, this decal would look terrible, because it would be doing its best to conform to the rough and textured surface, but over little buttons and things like that, it would just look like absolute garbage. Okay, so that is on. Now you could just leave it like that and give it, a little while and then move on to the next one. However, if you want to up your game, you want to use decal setting solutions. I'm going to use MicroSET and MicroSOL. And I'll explain these to you. There are other ones available, Mr. Mark Setter and Softer. That's Mr. Mark Setter, that's Mr. Mark Softer. It's the same kind of basic product, but a different name. But I'm using MicroSET and MicroSOL, which you can get from your models. The first one we're going to do is MicroSET. You have to do them in the right order. Basically, once you've got your decal on, get yourself the MicroSET. I've got it over here to the side. And what you want to do is get yourself a brush. I have a brush specifically for these. Don't use a brush that's going to be used for anything else. You don't want to contaminate it. And all you do is quite simply brush it over the decal. And you don't want to, there is a chance it could affect your paint layer, so try not to go all over the place. Just try and stick to the decal, brush it on the decal, and just a tiny amount over the edge, so that the MicroSET can actually scoot underneath the edge of the decal and get sucked underneath. Because what MicroSET will do, MicroSET is your setting solution. It will scoot under the decal, it will soften it, and it will help it go thump and stick down to the surface. Just a bit better. Now, if this was just a simple flat surface, try and catch the edge there. If this was just a simple flat surface, you probably wouldn't need MicroSET or MicroSOL at all. Oops, sorry, knocking the camera. You probably wouldn't need these at all, because it would just be a flat decal on a flat surface. It would look fine. But because we do have some very slight raised detail, it doesn't do any harm just to get it to bed down even more. So we're going to put that's on. We're going to leave that for about 5 or 10 minutes till it looks dry. And then the next step is to go in with the MicroSOL. So let me give that 5 minutes. And when we come back, we'll do the next step. Okay, so that's had about 10 minutes to dry, and you can see now it's just starting to bed into the surface a bit. It's still a bit lumpy bumpy, but that's fine. We're going to go now in with the MicroSOL. The MicroSET only needs to go on that first time, on the first layer, just to get it to suck down. The MicroSOL, the job of this stuff now, is basically to soften the decal. Now it's locked down in place. What it's going to do is going to soften the decal, make sure it adheres even more to the surface. It'll allow it to sort of flow into any little recesses and shapes that there are. It'll sort of mould is the word I'm looking for, I think, maybe. Because it softens it, it kind of sags and seeps into any little recesses and over any raised bits, and it also thins the decal slightly, so it will help remove any of that carrier film from around the edge. And the combination of these two just give you a real painted on look, or at least it doesn't look like a decal anymore. So what we're going to do, same as before, we're going to get our MicroSOL, get ourselves a brush, and we're going to do exactly the same. We're quite simply just going to brush it over. Now the same principle applies. Cover the decal, but go a little bit over the edge, but not massively. Again, like the MicroSET, it can potentially eat into your paint surface a little bit if you put on loads. And even if you've done a gloss coat, probably a bit too much there, if you've done a gloss coat first, it may also eat into that a little bit. So just try and stick to the decal itself and just a touch over the edge, just so at least you can introduce the MicroSET and MicroSOL to the edge, and they can suck underneath by capillary action. So I'm just doing that there. Now remember, these are still decals, these are still delicate, and like you saw there, it flipped up a little bit when I brushed it because it's over an open edge, so it is a bit delicate still, so go careful. And that's it. Now when you do MicroSET and MicroSOL, you may notice, you may not, but sometimes you may notice that after a minute or two, as it's drying, the decal kind of crunches up and goes all bubbly and horrible and looks like garbage. You can see it wrinkling a bit there, and you might think to yourself, oh, it's ruined, oh no. Whatever you do, do not do anything. Don't touch it, don't prod it, don't try and smooth it down with a cotton bud. Leave it alone. Don't start fussing with it. What happens is that the decal, along with other things it does, it will expand and then shrink back down, and that's how it helps adhere and suck into any recesses. So that's all part of the process. It will look like a wet piece of newspaper for a moment, but eventually it will smooth down and flatten down. Now you may need to do more than one course of MicroSOL. Basically, when you've got any surface that isn't completely flat and smooth, I mean, if it was a completely flat, smooth surface, you could probably just get away with one coat of that, and that'll be it. Because this has got a very tiny amount of relief to it, maybe 2 or 3 coats of this might be needed just to get it looking nice and flat and bedded down and painted on. Just go by ear, basically. As soon as that looks dry and it's not shiny anymore, it doesn't look wet and it's all smoothed out, go in with the second coat, go in with the third coat. Just add as required until you're happy with the decal. As an indication, sometimes a decal can need 1 coat and it looks perfect. Sometimes, if you've watched Tony's Yamaha motorbike build on this channel, on the E-Models channel, there's the bit where he's putting the decals, the Tamiya decals, on the helmet of his motorbike rider, and he had to do like 30 or 40 coats of MicroSOL because those decals are really thick and going over a curvy surface. So it does depend on, the surface you're putting it on, but you'll learn that slowly. But just keep adding coats. Give it time to dry, keep adding coats until you're happy with that decal. Probably 2 or 3 coats on here will be absolutely fine. It'll get it all flat and bedded down, and it'll look like an actual console rather than a decal on a bit of plastic. So I'll go and get all the rest of the decals done, and then when we come back we'll see what's left to do. Back in a minute. And what's left to do is very little, actually. We're going to be using some Tamiya Weathering Master Pastel Set A to do a little bit of weathering. Now, we're not going to do too much weathering because, like I've said before, it's going to be dark in this cockpit. Most people are never going to see it, and a lot of the stuff I'm about to do now is not actually going to be visible anyway, no matter what you do. But I know it's there, so that's why I'm doing it. Now, the reason I'm using these pastels, there's all kinds of pigments and powders and pastels available, and they all vary from really dry to really sticky. I love these because they have a little tiny bit of stick to them. They're not quite moist. They're kind of more like makeup powders, if you know what I mean. They've got a little bit of stickitude to them, but I love these because they go on beautifully, and this particular set, the earthy tones, work wonderfully to suggest dust and dry dirt that's built up on dark grey like colours like we've got in here in the cockpit, and blacks and things like that. They just contrast really nicely. It's similar to the kind of effect you'll see me and others do when they airbrush very light tan colour up the side of vehicles and tanks, just to give that kind of dried earth dust effect. But obviously in here, it's so small in here, there's no point getting the airbrush out, and we can achieve the same effect with these pastels. You'll also see it used on things like when people want to put dust effects on boots, on small scale figures like 1/16 scale figures, they might put these pastels on to give a sort of dusty boot effect. Now, they are really easy to use because they've got a little bit of stick. Of course, you can just put them on and not have to varnish over them. If it's a model that you're never going to handle ever again, or part of a model that you're never going to touch, you can just leave them as they are, and they always look perfect when they're not varnished, but I'll cover that in a minute. All you basically do is you break up the block of colour a little bit with a pin or just something, cocktail stick, just to break up the powder. I did that before I turned the camera on. And then you get the sponge end of it and you get it in the pigment and you splob it on. Now, unlike a dry, say, Ammo by MIG powder, of course, this is a slight sticky powder. It does stick by itself. And you just apply it on there, and then you can use the brush end that's on the other end of the applicator to feather the colour. You can use that to just catch edges if you want an edge highlight, things like that. And that's it. Now, there is one trick, like I said, these don't have to be varnished. If the part of the model you're applying it to is never going to be handled, you can leave them, and they always look best unvarnished. But if you are going to varnish them, and I am going to varnish these because I've got shininess from the decals, the trick is to put on more than you need. This is important because if you put on just enough and you think it looks fantastic and then you spray varnish over it, the varnish will dissolve some of the pigment a little bit, and you'll end up with what looked fantastic without varnish now looks really faint and you can't see it. So my advice to you if you're using these powders is always apply more than you need, and then when you varnish it, it'll fade back a little bit. And if you get the hang of it eventually, you'll know what the right amount to put on is. You'll see me, I'm going quite heavy here, and it looks a bit like I'm putting on too much, but when I varnish it, a lot of that will fade away and blend away because some of it does dissolve into the varnish while it's still a liquid. So just get it on, have fun. These are brilliant to use, and I do love the colours. Like I said, I have some shiny still left over from the decals and things like that, so I need to make it all nice and flat and not shiny. And for this, I'm using the Vallejo Premium Airbrush Colour Matte Varnish 62.062. Now, I've spent a long time searching for a good airbrush matte varnish, and I've been through various different ones and found ones that I thought were good that then turned out to be not great. I found ones that are absolutely brilliant and a doddle to apply, but they're not very durable, and I've been through loads. I've finally settled on these premium ones. They are easy to apply and tough as old boots. I love these. Now, if you've seen me do airbrushing before, you'll know my routine, and it can be used on these varnishes. I have a 3-step process. First of all, very, very misty, almost imperceptible, almost nothing on the model light key coat. I mist on the lightest and thinnest and almost invisiblest of key coats, and this is purely to just give the next 2 coats something to stick to. So I do my thin misty key coat, I give it 15 to 20, maybe 30 seconds of air just to flash it off a bit, and then I go in with 1 or maybe 2 heavier regular normal coats, and between those two, if I do more than one, I do another blast of 30 seconds of air from the airbrush just to flash off the coat. And this is the technique I use for most things: key coat, a misty key coat, air, heavy coat, air, heavy coat, done. And it's exactly the same for these. Now these are absolutely a dream to use. You do not thin them. Don't ever thin them. Never ever thin your varnishes. A bit like primers, don't thin your varnishes. Now I've got this going out at 17 psi thereabouts, which works perfectly for this varnish through my airbrush, an Iwata TRN1 Neo trigger airbrush, and with my generic white label compressor. Now that doesn't mean you should spray it at 17 psi, because you may have a different airbrush or a different compressor, or have a longer hose or a shorter hose, or have a million other things different to my setup. So never assume that because one person says spray at this psi, that's the right psi. It's a rough guide, but I find about 17 psi for my setup through our 0.35 Neo is absolutely fine, perfect. And one last piece of advice: no matter what varnishes you're spraying, if you are spraying a varnish of any kind, as soon as you finish spraying, you must strip down your airbrush and clean it thoroughly, more so than with paint. With the paint you can leave it for a little while and then go and clean it later on. With the varnish, it's a varnish. If you leave it in the airbrush for a few hours, you varnish the inside of your airbrush and it's going to be harder to remove. So whenever you're spraying any kind of varnish, don't wait around. As soon as you finish spraying, strip it down, clean it thoroughly, done. There you go. Happy times. And with that done, that's the interior cockpit pretty much completed now. I've still got to paint the figures. You can see I've got them here ready and primed. I'm not going to be able to film them. They are so small. When I was struggling a lot painting some of these small bits in a way that you could see them. So I'm not going to be able to film painting these guys. Plus this episode's about 1,000 hours long now. So I'm just going to get these painted off to one side. We'll get them done. And when we come back in the next episode, I'll have got the cockpit all ready with the figures in and everything like that. I do apologise. It's not practical for me to film some things, and tiny little dudes is one thing I can't, this kind of size, it's not something I can film easily without just showing you the back of my hand or the back of my, like that, or the back of my head or something. So my apologies, but the cockpit's done. It's looking pretty good now. It's got a matte varnish on it. Do keep in mind, like I said, notice how the pastels have faded away to more subtle colours now. They're really hard to discern. You can see them there in that bit of sort of deck there, and you can see they've faded a bit on the back here, but they are quite subtle. They do fade away, so keep that in mind when you're putting Tamiya pastels on something, or any pastels. When you're going to matte varnish it or gloss varnish it, whatever you're going to do, keep in mind it will fade something, because some of them will just basically get dissolved into the varnish while it's still liquid and fade away. So do keep that in mind. But that's done. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget, of course, that this is being produced for my very good friends and channel sponsors, emodels.co.uk, your one-stop shop for all your model making needs. Do pop along to emodels.co.uk and check them out. Don't forget, of course, they do have reward points now, so every time you go in store and order something, you earn reward points, and once you've accrued enough, you can put them towards stuff you want to order. So if there's a kit you've been looking at for a while, maybe it's a bit of a pricey kit, just keep it to one side, and if you can't get it right now, keep buying stuff and ordering stuff from eModels, and you'll earn the points, and eventually you'll have enough points to get the thing you want. So yeah, make sure you're registered. Go to the website, make sure you're registered, and you'll start earning points, and it's mint. And don't forget, this kit is now back in stock. Yes, this kit is discontinued. Bandai do not make it anymore. Not this version with the water slide decals and the lighting. They do not make it anymore. They never will again. Once every single kit has been sold and built, there are no more left of this version with the water slides. So they have now got a stock secured. They will be getting more. They will be the last ones. Once they sell out, they probably won't get any more, apart from the odd one that might pop up here and there very rarely. So if you have been looking at getting one of these, go and check one out. Earn some big fat points while you're ordering it. Get it and treat yourself. It is a truly awesome kit, and I'm having a great deal of fun painting it. I hope you're having a great deal of fun watching it. Anyway, that's going to do us. Thank you very, very much for watching. Do take care of yourselves. Make sure you stay safe. Wash your damn hands, you monsters. And I shall see you next time when we crack on with the outside hull areas. Take care. Go make something awesome. Go be awesome. And until next time, adios, amigos.